I'm delighted to welcome everybody here to the 20th lecture in our series of online talks dealing with various aspects of sporting art. We're now into our third year. Again, I'd like to thank Jamie Rountree of the Rountree Tryon Gallery for sponsoring this series. As I've said before, it means that we can continue to put on these talks for free. It also means that non-members and, more importantly, future members can join us. Again, we're recording this talk for future reference. I would also like to remind you that you can access previous talks through the BSAT website. Today, I would like to introduce Dr. Xavier Bray from the Wallace Collection, who's going to talk about its current exhibition, Portraits of Dogs from Gainsborough to Hockney. Although, as Xavier will explain, it covers a much wider, longer period than just those two artists. Xavier is an art historian specializing in Spanish art. He's currently director of the Wallace Collection in London. Xavier completed his PhD on Goya as a painter of religious imagery at Trinity College, Dublin, in 1999. Since then, he's been chief curator at the Dulwich Picture Gallery in London, the Museum of Fine Arts in Bilbao, and an assistant curator at the National Gallery. He's curated a wide range of exhibitions revolving around various themes from his first love of Spanish art. Since his appointment at the Wallace, he has curated exhibitions about Richard Wallace, the collector, Henry Moore, the Helmet Heads, and with William Dalrymple, Forgotten Masters, Indian painting from the East India Company. In his introduction to this exhibition in the catalogue, Xavier tells us that this exhibition has long been in the pipeline, and that it's with considerable trepidation that he suggested dog portraiture as the theme for an exhibition away from the traditional themes dedicated to the old masters. I think you'll agree, if you've seen it and after you've heard him, that there was no need for those fears. Having done all the original planning, Xavier then had to show great fortitude in bringing this exhibition to the public because the dreaded COVID intervened and caused a postponement. As usual, Xavier is happy to answer the questions at the end of this talk. The procedure is for you to just type in using the Q&A button to the bottom right of the screen. You type the questions and I'll put the questions to Xavier at the end of his talk. So thank you very much for taking part, Xavier, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. Well, it's a great pleasure to be talking to all of you. I normally talk to our public down here at the Wallace Collection, but to be on Zoom and to hopefully have a wide spread across the country is what I've always very much wished for. As Tim said, it's been an exhibition in the making that's for a good 20 years, which sounds like a long gestation period. But the main reason was because every time I presented it, everybody told me, no way, we're not doing that. What's going to be next? Cats. And that would be the sort of laughter around the table and the project would be dismissed. But now that I'm director, I can decide what to do. And so I've given myself the capricious project of at last bringing this together. And as you will see, there were two governing rules in bringing this exhibition together. At the same time, it sort of it tightened the possibilities, but in the other ways, it opened up new possibilities. The two rules were that everything, loans, this is all the pictures and sculptures and taxidermy that we've borrowed, come from United Kingdom collections, both public and private, so no external loans. And the second one was that there should be no humans whatsoever represented in these pictures. So what you end up with is a very pure portraiture of dogs. And the result, as you will see when you come to the exhibition, is quite surprising. Because the first thing you notice is that normally when you go into an art gallery, you will see humans looking rather pleased with themselves on the walls. And this time it's the dog that has that position, and they can look very pleased with themselves and they can look completely normal as dogs would be when you look at them. But they do have this extraordinary ability to not only contain some soul. They have this wonderful sense of presence, but they also, of course, reflect back on us indirectly, of course, but there is a sensation that the master or mistress or the painter or the artist is very much present within the portrait of the dog. And I'll try and explain that in the series of images that we have. Here is one of the posters, this beautiful Saluki dog taken from side profile by Lancia, whom I would say is one of the great painters of dogs that we produced here in this country in the 19th century. Interesting that he takes on that side profile, the very sort of grand look, and yet is able to capture beautifully the way the fur falls across the head, but also around the neck, and the different directions it goes in, as indeed we see in our own dogs. So, you know, this sense of attention to detail is something that is very present throughout the show. But why the Wallace? Why did I manage to get this through the exhibition committee here at the Wallace? Well, we do have two great masterpieces of dog portraiture. One is this wonderful painting by Rosa Bonheur, a lady painter of the 19th century who was extremely successful at painting animal paintings, but was particularly fond of her own dogs. And to me, this is one of the most direct, honest representations of a French otterhound. At least that's what the Kennel Club thinks it is. But the way it looks straight at you in the eyes, the way it's almost just run through the countryside and sat before you, there's something extremely spontaneous in its approach. And it's painted with unbelievable freedom. And also there's a sense of exploration in trying to capture the character and almost the psychology of this dog. And indeed, when one describes human portraiture, you come up with all kinds of words of the penetrating gaze, the very, the profound look, the soul is personified, and so on and so on. And what's been interesting in writing the catalogue is how you can indeed start using similar words in order to describe what is before you. We also have in the Wallace collection possibly the two most popular pictures that we sell most postcards of is the Bonheur and this one of by Lancia of it's called Doubtful Crumbs. It's allegorical. It's the idea is that these dogs take on a moral interpretation. The St. Bernard dog is fast asleep, having eaten the most delicious T-bone steak, and the poor Yorkshire Terrier is waiting for the moment while that poor might be dislodged so that he could get a morsel of this of the bone. It's not going to happen, I'm afraid. And but the allegory here is taken straight from St. Luke's Gospel, the rich man and the poor man, and of course, the rich man who doesn't share any of his wealth ends up going straight to hell, while the Yorkshire Terrier, you'll be pleased to hear, goes straight to heaven. It's a picture I use often when I'm trying to fundraise for the Wallace collection, and it works almost at every time. But in more, the reason why also is that Richard Wallace, the founder of the Wallace collection, absolutely loved his animals and dogs. He had Snipe, whom we know he would take for walks, particularly when it was extremely hot in the summer. He would actually wake up at 2 in the morning to take his dog down to Green Park to make sure it was cool enough. Indeed, when he made the Wallace fountains, the famous Wallace fountains that are all around Paris, he had hoped that the designer could have come up with a way so that the dogs could drink from the fountain at the bottom of it. Unfortunately, for aesthetic reasons, that was rejected, and he was long very sad about that. But when you walk around the Wallace, you will be amazed by how many dogs there are in pictures, in sculpture, and indeed, I think we've counted about 907, but they appear in all shapes and forms. Here's one sticking his head out from a very luxurious kennel, looking rather sad because his mistress's portrait has just been rejected by her lover. So, dogs do partake. And indeed, many PhDs are now being put forward, very much so the idea of a dog's point of view in 18th century French painting, for example, is one of those that is slowly coming up to the fore. But you also have the wounded dog, and these soldiers who are looking after the wounded dog. And of course, this, when it was painted in the 1820s, caused a lot of sadness in viewers, and they loved the picture because of its mournful qualities. Even pistols have the end bit of the gun. These pistols has portraits of dogs. And we also have jewels like such as this earring, and even a gutting kit with a deer being gnawed at by dogs in the trousseau. And these are little knives basically that would have helped you gut a deer. So anyway, I'm not going to go into that now, but the dog is omnipresent as such. But the exhibition really wanted to focus on, as I said, just portraits, and that's why when you come into the exhibition, you will be presented by pieces such as this. This is one of the oldest pieces we have in the show. It's an antique sculpture of the 1st century AD, found just outside Rome in the 18th century. Astounding realism in the way that the not only the ears and the expressions of the dogs as they almost lovingly bites the ear, but also look at the way the structure of the chest and the bones come out through the carving, all done in marble, is quite astonishing. Mary Beard, who is on our audio guide and worth listening to if you do come, is quite convinced when she starts off talking about these that the dogs were just, practical helpers to the Romans, that they would be mainly useful for hunting and guard dogs, cade canum. But then little by little, she realizes that actually looking at these two dogs, there's something a bit more, and she does suddenly wonder whether the domestication of dogs was something that the Romans care for. So interestingly, that even a great sort of classicist such as Mary Beard should start rethinking the relationship that Romans had with their dogs. And again, I see another PhD coming in that area. But we also wanted to include great artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, and I will accept that this is not naturally a portrait of a dog, but indeed he's very keen to capture an aspect of the dog, and in this case it's the paw. He looks at the way the fur falls across the claws and the tendons and the sinews. There's a real sense of wanting to understand and observe. And indeed, dogs do appear a lot in Da Vinci's pictures, such as his Last Supper and other compositions. So present, but here a different kind of portraiture, but done by an artist who takes on a more scientific approach. The show really began with this picture from the Ashmolean, a street dog lying across the stone slab. The reason it grabbed my attention as a student was its realism, the way it's lying there in the penumbra, coming out from the darkness. But straight away, a narrative starts between you and the dog. Have you just woken him up? Is he pleased to see you, or is he too tired to react? Somebody said, is he suffering from mute rabies? And somebody even said, might he be dead? I don't know, but there's something very direct, very honest in its depiction. Unfortunately, we do not know who the artist is, nor what kind of dog it is, or who the dog belongs to. So suddenly we are free to come up with our own view on this. But for me, this is the universal dog, the dog that is there as a perfect model, doesn't ask too much from you, has this incredible honest way of looking back at you. And of course, that sense of honesty, the connection between us and the dog, is something that really comes out in the exhibition. Indeed, dogs were very much part of the studio environment. Many painters enjoyed having dogs as company to go for walks with and paint in the outdoors, but also, of course, within the studio. And I'm just showing you a German painter here on the left who even has his visiting card with the dog there, but also the great painter on the right, Carracci, with a little dog looking through behind the easel. I think the constant companionship is the obvious one to refer to, but I think as models and also as animals that almost tell you whether your picture is good or not, and whether you should destroy it. Dogs do have that honest opinion about things, or at least we think they do. And I think that's something that artists, I'm sure, picked up on while they were working in solitude in their workshops. But that is one reason why the show really began, was looking at portraits of dogs by artists who owned them. And indeed, this is Gainsborough, who represents Tristram and Fox. Tristram and Fox were very much the house dogs. Indeed, this picture was hanging above their mantelpiece. And we know that whenever Lady Gainsborough and Mr. Gainsborough had an argument, the Tristram and Fox would come to the rescue. Thomas would write a little note for Tristram to deliver to Fox. Fox would then deliver it to his wife, she would read it, decide whether to respond or not, and then they would act as go-betweens. So very interesting, the idea of using dogs as a conduit, but also using them as alter egos. And I think the alter ego aspect is another interesting area to think about. Famously, Hogarth, the painter, also had his pug Trump. So that many more examples occur. This is John Soane, the great British architect who designed and built the Bank of England. Serious man who we know had a terrible falling out with his son, and yet this is the more human side, perhaps, to him of Fanny, a Manchester Terrier, whom he loved very much, mainly because it had belonged to his wife. She died in 1816, and Fanny survived his wife, and in a way, perhaps the soul of his wife was transferred to this lovely dog, and therefore Joan Soane made a point of looking after and celebrating her life by commissioning this very beautiful portrait from James Ward. Interesting that he should set her within an architectural ruin, an archaeological site, possibly somewhere in Sicily or Athens. But so there's a bit of the autobiographical, but through the dog in this case. And then Lord Byron, who we all know loved his dog Bosom, but also had this dog called Lion. He commissioned several portraits, and apparently they hung in more prominent places within his Herbert Newstead Abbey than humans did. So again, this preference to have that relationship with dogs rather than humans, and the sense of trust that there exists. And then the Brizo that I mentioned earlier, that I think must be Rosa Bonheur's own dog. Brizo is the name of a goddess of the wind that would bring back the sailors back home. I love the idea that Brizo, a female dog, and Rosa Bonheur being a woman artist, maybe there was a connection there. Again, I don't want to project my own opinion on that, but there's something very intimate between mistress and female dog in this case. There are other ways of thinking about dogs, and of course, I mean, didn't want to categorize them too much, but indeed, the way dogs that were commissioned by the nobility, the aristocracy, and as you'll see, the royals take on a different form. This is an astonishing survival in sculpture, possibly related to some kind of sepulchre effigy in a Norfolk church as such, whether it was part of a tomb, we don't know, but it is the most beautiful image of a greyhound. It has everything to do with fidelity here, but at the same time, beautifully construed, the way that the fur falls across the body, and also the collar, which of course signifies it as having an owner. So again, a very interesting connection between the aristocrat who's wanting to commemorate this fateful being. But then you have dogs such as Ringwood, who is very much the founding breed, the seed of the Brocklesby hound, foxhound, here painted by Stubbs, and in such a way that almost like a frieze is seen from side on to show off his prowess, his intelligence. The tail is erect, almost like a sighthound, ready for action. And then the very nice poetic touch with the foxgloves on the far right, that alludes to the foxhound in itself. So some nice parallels to bring a sense of life and presence. But the royal dogs is something that also really comes out very interestingly, and it has to be said that while, of course, dogs surrounded the courts of Spain, of France, and of Britain, it was particularly Queen Victoria who had a specific affection for dogs, and possibly also something that she was to learn from her husband, Prince Albert, who also brought his own love for dogs over from Germany. This is Dash, a King Charles Spaniel that Victoria loved to smithereens. She wrote about Dash in her diaries and lots of lovely little references. And here's Dash again, presiding on this little lovely canopy, while Hector and Nero, a slightly larger greyhound, and greyhounds are sort of at attention. What's wonderful about this is that this could be Van Dyck of great courtiers, but transformed through Landseer into this very elegant and highbrow portrait of three dogs who are posing perfectly, beautifully behaved, while the parrot down at the bottom is cracking nuts and making a nuisance of itself. So again, a bit of British humor there going on, but at the same time demonstrating to what extent the dog can be turned into these very noble beings worthy of being portrayed. Queen Victoria even spent quite a lot of time doing watercolors of her own favorite dogs, Podge in this case, sitting up, probably begging. And indeed with Prince Albert, they took lessons in making etchings with Landseer. So they really went for it. And then the section that works very well with the Wallace itself, because we have so much French 18th century art here. But Bachelier, a strange looking Havanese breed dog, possibly a Maltese, sitting there having misbehaved, taken the slippers of its master into its kennel, now sits up, a bit like the Podge which is seen, almost playfully begging for forgiveness. Some people love this picture, other people find it a bit difficult to take in, but it demonstrates to what extent dogs were pampered in 18th century France. And indeed, when the French Revolution came round in 1789, many of these dogs were left abandoned in the streets, starving. Many were died or were killed. And famously, Marie Antoinette went to her own execution holding on to her little Pomeranian, which demonstrates to the extent that she had to, the need she had to have and the love she had for her little dogs. We couldn't hesitate but include taxidermy also in the exhibition, mainly because this is actually a fascinating survival, one of the first Pekingese to enter the country in the 1880s. It was actually smuggled out illegally from China, but it was going to become the great sort of forebear to the many Pekingese that you see today. And indeed, this is the great grandson, Kylan, from Preston Manor. But very interesting that such breeds come in quite late in the day. We take it for granted. And I guess one thing that really comes out is how the love for dogs that we have in this country is very much to do with our own past, colonial past as well, but and the empire, but the idea of having very open trading routes with the world beyond. And indeed, dogs were diplomatic presence just as much as political. They have a political touch as well. And I think that, again, there's another PhD to be written on how dogs were very much part of the trade and also diplomatic exchanges between countries. So something worthy to think about, particularly when you think about pugs or Pekingese and the whole lapdog area of dogs. And then this is a section that I really wanted to bring out, the idea of the anthropomorphic dog, the idea that the dogs can take on human attitudes. And indeed, many of us, when we talk about our dogs or look at our dogs, we like to think we know exactly what they're thinking, feeling, whether they're sad, happy. In the end, all they want is love, food, and sleep, really, and a good walk. But we like to give them human attributes. And this is the extent to which some of us do that. Landseer was a specialist in this. And he here is taking on the famous story of Alexander, the great emperor, visiting the famous Stoic philosopher Diogenes. And Alexander says, what can I do for you, Diogenes? And and Diogenes says straight away, well, first of all, you could get out of the sun because you're casting a shadow and you're making me feel rather cold. What's interesting about Diogenes is that he was known as the great cynic, and cynic, kynikos, in Greek means dog-like. And indeed, he based a lot of his philosophy on dog behavior, the idea that dogs could just drink, feed, sleep, and do whatever they need to do on street level. And that is why Diogenes ended up in a barrel, living a very dog-like life as he was seeking the honest man, the simple life. So interesting that the dog should take on that philosophical attribute, which is, I'm sure, what Landseer is alluding to in this picture. And yeah, actually, this is a 19th century picture of showing indeed Diogenes. This is not in the exhibition, but just to give you an idea of him as the dog-like philosopher. I've already mentioned this picture, but it's for the first time it puts him in the context of the allegorical dog, the idea that dogs take on that moral interpretation. And then I did want people to shed a few tears as they leave the exhibition. Of course, when the master or mistress dies, the dog laments, there is a sense of loss, and vice versa. When a dog dies, we all have very difficult times facing up to that. And indeed, that is probably why a lot of these dog portraits survive. They are ways of immortalizing the love we experience for our dogs, and to keep them, forever alive in our mind, and by having a portrait of them, their presence is with us. This is a very famous picture in its time by Lancia of the old shepherd's chief mourner, and the shepherd is in the coffin, and the dog is going to be there, possibly not even eat or drink, and will be by the side of its master. And of course, it will remind you of the Greyfriars Bobby up in Edinburgh, and many other stories, such as Ulysses' dog, who waited for 20 years for his return. There are many such examples, but I wanted to turn it round as well and have Lucian Freud, who absolutely loved his whippets. He just loved his dog because he said, "I'm impressed by their lack of arrogance, their ready eagerness, their animal pragmatism." And it's interesting, this idea of that we do find that simplicity in a dog that is able to listen to us and make all our issues, our human issues, seem so superficial in the end. And I think Lucian Freud really did find that sort of solace, I would say, with Pluto. And in the exhibition, we do have his grave. It's again not a portrait per se, but Freud, when Pluto died, made this painting of the garden, the leaves, and the little plaque with Pluto. So this is the moment when you're supposed to be on your knees, sobbing away. But luckily, we end with Hockney and his wonderful portraits of Stanley and Boogiji, two dachshunds that he had in the 1990s. They were his sort of long-term companions, mainly because Hockney had a very difficult time losing many of his friends to AIDS. And in these two dachshunds, he found the perfect company, to the extent he spent a good year or two painting them consistently, and came up with a good 60 pictures of them in different guises. And in the exhibition, we've got 6 of these, one sitting up, one fast asleep, one still fast asleep, and then slowly waking up and then looking at you in the eye. And it has all the wit, and yet at the same time, the challenges that it is to paint dogs. And indeed, in the show, we've got this wonderful footage that shows David Hockney trying very patiently on the ground, drawing away, and trying to capture his dogs. But of course, they keep moving, they keep getting up, they keep stretching. But the result are these very spontaneous pictures. And Hockney does, he's on the audio guide, and do listen out for him. But he says, these two dear little creatures are my friends. They are intelligent, loving, comical, and often bored. They watch me work. I notice the warm shapes they make together, their sadness and delights. And being Hollywood dogs, because he was living in LA, they somehow seem to know that a picture is being made. So there's always that sense of jokiness, but also that wit and that sense of loving life and their presence. And indeed, he does refer to them in the audio as his best friends. There's something and here he is feeding them, and of course they are on ultimate behavior. So this is, in a sense, the general survey of the show. We do have a whole series of lectures that I'll be delighted for you to come and see on royal dogs, top dogs. That's a book that's just been published of owners and their dogs. Wonderful show, wonderful one on Freud and Hockney with Martin Gayford, and then Best in Show. These are all available on Zoom and on site. So do come. But without further ado, I'll be delighted to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Xavier, thank you very much for that almost whistle-stop tour. I think there are 50 pictures, are there, in the exhibition?
That's right, about 60 pieces, including a few brooches and a bit of Fabergé, and a few drawings as well.
I took my granddaughter in Easter week to see the exhibition, and I don't think she'd ever been to an art exhibition before. I just wondered, are you attracting a new audience to the Wallace? Is it an opportunity to bring new people in?
Yeah, I think we're doing, some tickets are selling really well, and we've sold about 21,000 tickets so far, which for us is amazing. It's very interesting who is coming and where they're coming from. London has suffered a lot post-COVID. People find it hard to come to London. It's expensive, and it takes time, and people don't have the same incentive. But this time, It's amazing. I've met people coming up from Cumbria, Yorkshire, Wales, and it just feels very comforting to know that people will make the effort and come down. And we're seeing a lot of young people, and we're seeing all kinds of people. That's what's so interesting. And people who've never heard of the Wallace before or know it. So a lot of first-time visitors. And I think you're right. The idea of bringing young children to see this show, it's a wonderful introduction to art in general, but through something that they will connect and enjoy. And to the extent that we actually commissioned a local state school, year sixes, to do the audio guide for children. So you have children talking about the dogs for their own friends as such. And that makes such a difference. Normally, anything we do for children is done from an adult's point of view of what we think the child would like. In this case, it's the child deciding what they want to talk about for other children. And it's been a real success. So if you do come back, I make sure that your granddaughter takes on the audio guide.
That's a fantastic idea. I think it's something we might steal for Newmarket, because obviously horses have similar attractions to a younger audience. I just wonder, having attracted a new audience, is there resistance from your traditional audience? Is it something that they've struggled with and thought about your role in the art world? Have they had to rethink your position?
It's hard to say, because the British are very good at keeping things to themselves and not coming out with it. But I welcome all kinds of criticism, and in a way you might want to use Jonathan Jones' review of the exhibition, which called it a dog shit of an exhibition and gave us 1 star. But funny enough, it actually brought more people in than deterred people to come. But he, in a way, summed up what I was imagining some people would think about the show, that this was a populist show, that it was, not Raphael or Michelangelo, that this was not highbrow enough. And then what's interesting is that little by little people are coming to check it out for themselves. And I'm noticing people realizing that actually, because the quality of what's on show is so high, it's quite hard to argue against it. And I was very careful in selecting that everything should be the artistic quality should be very high. And once you do that, it not only does the show stay together, but there are no moments when somebody could be critical of it. They can't criticize the quality. And that has helped a lot. And slowly, my museum colleagues are coming to have a look, although I can't say that many have yet. But I'm hoping that they will, be able to convince themselves they must see it as part of their job. What I think is interesting is that it is slowly inspiring a new kind of art history, a new way of thinking about. Nowadays it's not just about talking about connoisseurship; it's about social and politics and fashion, and there are so many ways into the arts. And actually, dogs present a wonderful introduction to that area.
I was wondering whether you've talked about the Jonathan Jones review, but I wondered whether he or you thought he'd missed the whole point of the show, that the themes that you're seeing in the Old Masters are actually being seen in this exhibition. And I think you've done well to draw those out, the anthropomorphic, some of the other themes that are there in the exhibition. It's more than just a series of dog pictures.
Very much so. That's what I think it's so surprising, even to me. I, of course, selecting them, I have some, I have a notion of what it might look like, but seeing them together has brought out so many new ways of thinking about these portraits. And actually, the person I love to come and see this show is the director of the National Portrait Gallery, because for me, at least one room should be dedicated to portraits of dogs, because as we all know, they reflect so much of their own masters, and indeed humanize their masters and mistresses. And it means that it's another way of understanding people. And indeed, Grayson Perry's wife, who came to see the show, she said, they're full of psychology, these dogs. They reflect back so much, and actually, in the end, they're portraits of humans. So interesting to the extent that actually the dog is there, but then disappears to become again portraits about ourselves. We are so obsessed by ourselves that these poor dogs end up being us. And that, I think that's a lot of, it's quite a lot to take back home. But what is this relationship that we have with dogs? Why do we need them so much? And why do we offload so much of our anxieties on them? And why are they so long suffering? And why do they put up with us? I mean, sorry, I'm just opening it up a bit here too much, but it does make you think about that relationship.
Do you think it was Landseer? There are, what, 13 pictures by Landseer in the exhibition? Are you Victorian sensibilities? Yeah. Or
I think Landseer does come out very strongly. He's definitely, I just couldn't resist but include quite a few of his pictures, mainly because he really excelled in the art of dog portraiture. But he does come up with different ways of thinking about it. And I think, in a way, this is a mini retrospective of Landseer. He's very unfashionable at the moment. And this is quite a good way of bringing him back to the fore, the sun. I know that Jonathan Jones could not bear him, but he's a very good painter and very technically incredibly adept.
I wondered whether obviously for us as enthusiasts for sporting art, we obviously love the pictures. I wondered whether you, coming from outside our world, have thoughts for us as to how we should be looking at these pictures nowadays, beyond just the dog portraits.
That's an interesting question. I think, well, first of all, I think quality, do not let, I think if you want to bring people with you, I think it's important not to have that sort of I mean, they're wonderfully attractive, but they could be considered, not, I don't want to use the word outsider art, but quite naive representations. And I think one should try, although there's definitely a place for such representations and they mean a lot to whoever owns them. I think one should be aware that what really helps the idea of dog portraiture be raised out of maybe just being called sporting art is the quality. So if there's a way of at least presenting the quality first and then maybe showing what comes out of it, like with human portraiture, there's some very good human portraiture and there's some extremely bad human portraiture. So it's a matter of maybe dividing it a bit out. That's what I would do as a curator, is select the best and put that forward to make sure that you've got a very good front team as such.
I suppose that's should be there for every curator, is to concentrate on quality and then try and interpret the quality to your audience. You've come at this exhibition from a real background in Spanish art, going back, 30 years, 40 years? Is this a very British enthusiasm, or are you seeing it elsewhere? You mentioned that the Wallace has got, what, 900 dog portraits included. Is it across all cultures, or is it a British phenomenon?
No, I mean, of course, it's very tempting to just say it's a British phenomenon, but I would say it's a British phenomenon. I would, if I had to sort of try and come up with, dates and all that, I would say it's definitely a British phenomenon from the 19th century onwards, and it stays with us. And, it makes you realize how the Victorian age has had such an impact on us in our ways of drinking tea and many other things. But I would say that from my Spanish point of view, and one point, actually, now that I've done this, I'm now starting to think about Spanish art and dog portraiture. And while dog portraiture wasn't a genre in itself, there's some amazing portraits of dogs within portraits of humans. And indeed, Velázquez was a great painter of dogs, and Murillo as well. So suddenly, what's happened to me personally is that I'm now thinking about representation of dogs in a lot of the paintings by my favorite artists. And what do they mean? And I didn't have time. I was going to show you a few Goya dogs. I mean, I could, maybe that's my next lecture, is Spanish art and dogs. But and again, that might be another PhD. But what I'm saying is that actually the Spanish love their dogs, and you could argue, and this is more research, that Charles I's visit to Spain in the 1620s and seeing the Philip IV and his dogs and the way dogs were treated and looked after, mainly for hunting and that kind of thing, might have inspired him to think about dogs back at his court in London. And we forget in this country how much we borrowed and take from other European countries, but also across what was the British Empire. And I think, and in a way, I mean, I'm not going to get into Brexit and all that, but in a way, it's a sort of little nudge that, you know, without our very open attitude to the world beyond, this love for dogs would probably not have been so developed. And also the sheer amount of breeds that we have in this country is definitely not because of the breeds that were developed in this country. It's thanks to the breeds coming from the outside. So, you know, such as the Pekingese, the Labrador. Labrador is actually a Spanish word for working dog. Spaniel, Spania, Spain. You know, there's lots of links there that make you realize that England was very outward-looking just as much as it is inward-looking.
It sounds as though there's a stimulus for much more work to be done.
It is. I think this is the tip of the iceberg.
Well, the one thing that surprised me was the period that you cover, going back to Roman times. Were there pictures that you wanted to include but couldn't get? Was it a question of editing to create this exhibition, or were you struggling to find
no, I mean,
or works of art to include?
Yeah, I think, I mean, within this country, there was actually a lot to choose from, but I did want to have a full range as possible, so I had to be very selective. But there was a lot to be to choose from. There are a few casualties along the way. One would have been a picture from the Borough Collection in Glasgow, which was a beautiful portrait of a French hunting dog that had belonged to Louis XV. And that would have been a wonderful addition to the show. So there are some that are missing. But
was that one that got lost through COVID, or
no? It's just they didn't want to lend it. They just reopened, and that it was, you know, it was a most loved dog, and they couldn't part with it. One of those scenarios. Had I opened up the loneliness to international, then it would be a very different show. But there'll probably be, you know, 10 masterpieces of dog portraiture in the exhibition. And, you know, maybe that's a remake to be done, a bit like what the Americans do. They take English and French films and then turn them into American films. Maybe this is what will happen to this show. It'll be taken over and made even bigger.
In some ways, one would like that to happen.
Yeah, I think
to be a leader.
Yeah, it'd be nice. It'd be nice.
Did you learn any lessons from the COVID disasters or dramas? Your fortitude, or?
No, I mean, I think it was, you know, disappointing having to postpone it, but, you know, sometimes letting things happen naturally is a good thing. And I would say this is the perfect time to do this exhibition following COVID, following the fact that many people have reconnected even more with their dogs and have acquired dogs in the meantime. I think we need something a bit more. I'm not going to say this is light relief, but it's been very interesting to see how people come out with a smile of the exhibition, and even people talk about well-being, which is, you know, a difficult one to determine. People come out feeling happy and well and calm as they do with their own dogs. But of course, seeing so many dogs in the same place, there are people who come out very, very pleased. So I think that kind of feeling possibly wouldn't have been as appreciated as it is now. So that's what I would say.
Right. I think those are the questions we've had. So, Xavier, thank you. Can I just show the catalogue? It's a fantastic catalogue. It's extremely readable. It is already in my collection. So if you can't get to the exhibition, please do. But the exhibition goes on till the middle of October, isn't it?
That's right. So we, I think nowadays, well, I mean, another thing about COVID is our budgets are in dire straits, and in order to do exhibitions now, you have to, well, I mean, this has been it's been not expensive, but it's been, we've had to find the money to do this show. But because things came from the UK, because we recycle a lot of our cases, it's quite a sustainable exhibition. And also because it runs until the mid-October, it's meant to be a slow burner. So while you might think you've got time to see it, I mean, I would urge you to come, particularly in between holidays, if you can do that, because it does get quite crowded when it's holiday time. So midweek is a good time, or Monday or Tuesday is a good time to come. And yes, the catalogue is it's about to go out of print, but we're going to reprint it. You'll be pleased to hear. So that's you, but you can order it online, and then don't hesitate to come and engage with our programming, which is quite fun. Particularly Edgar Peters Bauer, who's American, but did this fantastic exhibition on in America called Best in Show. It did have humans and dogs in it, but he did something called Best in Show, and he'll be very interesting to hear about his experience of organizing not a dissimilar exhibition back in 2010 or something like that. So yeah.
Do you just book, or
yeah, you can book online. It should be very straightforward. Our website has all the you can just book online and you get your place, and then if you don't want to come to the Warriors, it's like what you're doing so well now, so it's on Zoom.
Is it a free
some of them are free and some of them are paying. I can't remember which one's which.
Okay.
But
but it's all through your website?
Yeah, that's correct.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Xavier. I'll just announce our next lecture in this series. That's obviously your favourite.
Yeah, it is, yeah. I don't know.
And Sophie, who is helping us with the technology, has Dachshunds. So
well, can they do this? That's my big question. Can they do this? Can they really? Because apparently David Hockney said, my God, at one point he sat up, and I knew I only had 2 minutes to do this one because I was very nervous that their back would snap. So, but apparently Stanley could do this. I don't know if her Dachshunds can do the same thing, but
we've got one that can, but we don't encourage it because you said it's not good for their backs.
Exactly. Well, there you go. So Hockney was speaking the truth. I like that.
Right. Our next lecture will be on the 25th of May at 2 o'clock. When Catherine Field, the Packard curator at Palace House, will talk about the new hang of 20th century art, sporting art at Palace House, including works by Munnings, Edwards and Skeeping. It's a fantastic rehang of the second floor there. And that will be followed by a conversation in June, 22nd of June, with Charles Church. Charles's recent life-size portrait of John Halliday, the beaver huntsman, is now on display in the King's bedroom at Palace House. And he will be in conversation with me about his work and his projects that he's working on at the moment. So thank you, Xavier, for all your time this afternoon preparing the talk, and for entertaining us and encouraging us and forcing us, I think, to think a bit more about sporting art. That's more than the pictures. There's more in there that we should be working on. And I think you're going to stimulate us to do more. So thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated. I'm sorry Sally wasn't here, but thank you, Sophie, for helping in the meantime. So thank you, Xavier. Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.